Welcome to the Franklin Method Fellowship. I'm your co-host Solange Ross, and I'm joined by my colleague Deborah Chassie. We are physical therapists specializing in the pelvic floor. In this podcast, we share our passion for the Franklin Method and integrating it into functional, everyday movements, all forms of exercise, and our physical therapy practices. We also share a love for talking about the pelvic floor. We hope to inspire you to move better and feel better in your body. Always check with your doctor before beginning an exercise program. This podcast is not intended to be used as medical advice. Let's grab your Franklin Method balls and bands. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of the Franklin Method Fellowship. My name is Solange Ross, and I'm here with my colleague Deborah Chassie. I'm coming to you from New York City, and Deborah's in the beautiful Corona del Mar. And
the sun shining.
The sun is shining down upon her as we speak. And today, in this episode, we are going to be talking, as promised to you in the last episode, about breathing and the pelvic floor. So welcome to today's episode. And so as we begin, let's just throw this out there about the pelvic floor. So it's really one of the most misunderstood areas of the body, especially when I think about my grandparents and even my parents talking about bowel and bladder function, right?
Right.
We just don't talk about it. You know, my kids are growing up in a very different world today where we speak a little bit more freely about things, and I hope there will be a change. But when it comes to the pelvic floor, gosh, I mean, you don't talk about it. There's no talk about sex. Right? But
Right.
We're going to talk about sex. So why would it be an area that we understand well if we're not talking about it and we're not having these conversations? Do you have anything to add to that, Deb?
Well, no, I just think it's so true. I mean, how private it was, even to in my parents' generation, to even say the word pregnancy. It was like, oh, we know where the baby goes. We know how it gets there, and we know what happens. And so we don't want to talk about it. You're pregnant. But my generation was different. People were much more open to talking about different things. I have this one patient. She's amazing. So she had a couple of kids, 2 or 3 children, and she has bowel issues, like big time bowel issues. She will just have no control over, I got to go right now. And she doesn't even have time to get to a bathroom. And so she tells everybody. And so just after a few visits, like 3 sessions with her, she was able to get to the bathroom in time. And that was amazing. But what amazes me more, my point, is that she tells everybody. And she tells everybody her problem. And she's quite open about it. So this is a younger generation. She's more like in her 30s.
Yeah, and that because she's talking about it and is not going to accept that this is going to just happen to me. I'm talking about it and I'm going to find the therapy that I need, which was she found you.
Yeah.
Look, there she is, she can get to the bathroom now. That's awesome.
Right. Yeah. And we actually discovered it wasn't just the pregnancies that were causing it or delivering babies, that there were other previous traumas that had caused it. So that's an important key factor too. And then learning how to do pelvic floor contractions functionally, so that you're actually in a healthy way supporting the strength and flexibility of the pelvic floor.
Absolutely. I didn't even think about that because her doctor may have said, oh, you just need to do some Kegels or, you just need to do some strengthening down there. And we're going to really address today our Franklin Method functional approach to pelvic floor physical therapy.
Yeah.
And another thing about the pelvic floor is we can't see it. And I think it's also misunderstood because we can't see inside the bowl of the pelvis. So if we
Yeah.
can't see the muscles, it's not like when we're strengthening and we go to the gym and we lift a dumbbell. We're doing bicep curls, so it's very clear that our bicep is shortening and lengthening.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to these muscles that are internal, how do we know what we're doing there, especially if we don't have a good image of where they are in our body and we don't talk about our pelvis? So that's another thing with why this area is so misunderstood. What we hope for you all to get out of today's episode is a connection to this part of the body, and we'll have an image in our mind and how we can get good function through breath. And yeah, you'll walk away knowing a lot about the pelvis and just stuff that you can do throughout your day. Anywhere you can take it with you, connect to your pelvis. You don't have to be in a gym.
Right.
Wherever you are in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's one thing I love about the Franklin method is we don't have to be in a gym. I mean, I can be lying on the floor, lying in bed, being inside lying, swimming, so many different positions, walking, where I can focus on inside my body without having to physically see it or to be at a gym and know that I'm doing some sort of muscle strengthening.
Absolutely. And we're not going to look at it in isolation. We're looking at it with full body movements. We're looking at the pelvic floor as part of a system that we use many, many times a day, 20,000 breaths a day. 200,000 would be a lot. So many opportunities through breathing to have good pelvic floor function, addressing it as part of a system.
Yeah. And did I tell you about my mother? That she walks 4 miles within an hour, 3 days a week. Did I tell you that?
You have told me about that, and I think that's amazing.
Well, and the reason I'm bringing that up is a lot of her friends have incontinence. She is 89 years old and does not have incontinence and had 6 children. That's amazing, isn't it? And it's the walking, right? That symmetrical movement of walking.
He's getting good pelvic floor function through walking.
That's right.
And what a brilliant approach to really look at getting good, healthy function through the things that we do most of the time. So we're going to look at that, starting with breathing, but then tying it into walking, bending, because those are the opportunities where you want to hit. That's what we're doing all the time. We're not spending our life in a gym. We're spending fractions of our life in a gym. So if we can really reframe that, then there's so much power and opportunity that we can bring for good function to our body.
Yeah, absolutely. I had this experience. I think I'm going to tell you right now.
Tell me.
All right. It happened this morning. And, with the realization that we're going to be talking about the pelvic floor. So I'm going to try to do this where you can see me move back a little bit. So my butt is on this ball like this, in this position.
I'm with you.
Okay. And I'm thinking about, and I'm doing some sort of movement while I'm on this ball like this, right? And I'm thinking, my sacrum is moving around on the ball. And then I thought, my rectum is right there next to the sacrum, and my sacrum is polishing my rectum.
Oh.
And then I thought, and my uterus is right there too, right on top of the rectum. So the rectum is polishing the uterus, and the uterus is polishing the bladder. And then I went backwards, bladder resting and moving on top of the uterus moving and being rotated on top of the rectum, and rectum rotating on top of the sacrum, and the sacrum on the ball.
What a beautiful organ massage for the pelvic.
It was amazing. But that's like practicing time and time again, practicing the Franklin method. You start to just develop the ability to be more creative and have more fun and find yourself in different positions, and you just start to think about something and you get ideas. And that's beautiful.
That's what's great for our brain, right? We want these, right? Having that experience, right? That was recorded in your brains, and now your brain has that experience to access again. And it's like, whoa, that was amazing. Well, I'm going to remember that sensation. So let's recreate that nice organ slide on the ball again. Then the muscles are just going to dynamically organize themselves around the organs.
Yeah.
And what a brilliant approach that we can do that just with a nice little rolling of the ball underneath our sacrum. So powerful, that tool that we have available to us.
Yeah.
So before we begin, let's do a little check-in. And for our check-in, we're going to keep the check-in so that we notice in and around the pelvis, whatever you notice and feel in your pelvic floor with the knowledge that you have at this moment. And so we'll check in and we'll see what you can sense and feel. 3, 2, 1, and go. And welcome back. How did that go for you?
Very nice. I think especially after talking about what I did on that ball, I just felt so open in my pelvic area, the pelvic floor. I just felt like, oh, things could just be relaxed, the pelvic floor muscles. And I'm going to put on, doesn't this kind of look like the diaphragm we were talking about?
Absolutely, it does.
We have so much sun here.
But you're in full-on beach mode. I love it.
Little sun protection.
You always need sun protection.
Yeah. Got to keep that young-looking skin.
Definitely.
Right.
When I ask people what they sense in their pelvic floor, they will share stuff like warmth. They may notice a little bit of movement around the sit bones. They may associate movement of the lower belly with breath, or sensations around the belly with breath. Maybe sensations around the perineum. And in my check-in, what I noticed was a combination of those things, but I did notice that there was a little bit more, one side seemed like a little bit softer. I'm sitting on the floor and I could feel like a little bit more of a give around one of my sit bones. And whereas the other feels like it's just a little bit more spread out.
Yeah.
So the good thing is we know a lot of tools that can help to get rid of whatever tension may be going on one side of the pelvis. But just know that these are maybe sensations that you may feel, or maybe you didn't feel much, and that's okay. Because again, if we don't have a good image about the muscles, then it's harder to feel. So part of the embodiment process, it begins with developing an image. Then we'll get into a touch process where we touch the bony landmarks. And then we'll start to imagine, and that will help us to gain that felt experience in our body. But it is a practice. So if you didn't feel much, not to worry at all.
Yeah. I've been noticing when I'm driving, and it's actually doing better now, But for a while there, I was noticing when I was driving that I was gripping. So I'm just going to kind of stand up and show you what that felt like. But here's my pelvis. And I just noticed that I was gripping on this side. And if I told myself, let go, relax the pelvis, then I could drop it. And then 10 minutes later, I'd notice I'm gripping again. And so then I would have to remind myself, let go, let it relax. So sometimes we have those kind of situations too, where we have to remind ourselves that we don't have to grip.
So going back and checking in and really getting into like, why does this keep creeping back up on me? And even if we don't know the answer to that question, the fact that you can make that change so that it feels better and continue to notice that, that is a beautiful thing. Should we get into the functions?
Right. So there's so many things we talk about: bladder, bowel, sex, babies. Our pelvic floor muscles are supporting our organs. And the way I like to think of it, see if I have an image. I think we could use this. Right. So let's say you sneeze and you get this big pressure. So not only does it go forward, but it also goes downward, which is why some people complain about leaking or passing gas or things like that, because they're getting that expansion into the pelvic bowl. And so the pelvic floor muscles, they need to be strong so that they lengthen, because when they lengthen like that, they go, oh, I got you.
I love that you mentioned that, like, lengthening to absorb the force, because a lot of people would think the opposite. Big sneeze coming, I just need to contract and squeeze harder. What I see is people that practice that, they actually leak more, rather than teaching the muscle to contract in a lengthening way where they can absorb the force. The same principle is, when you jump, do you jump and land with straight knees, or do you bend your knees? well, certainly you need to bend your knees to be able to jump. But if you don't get that bend and you land with more of a rigidity versus letting the knees bend and allowing stuff to lengthen and absorb, that's what we need. We need the opposite.
Well, and the same thing is through sex too, right? So if you are tense having sex, then it's going to be harder to have an orgasm, right? And so, told you we talk about sex. So, when someone's having sex, they just need to be able to just like relax, kind of like let it come to them, and just be in that moment, be present in that moment, just have a relaxed pelvic floor and enjoy the sensations.
And then there's the other aspect too about the pelvic floor, that it can serve as emotional protection for us. If something traumatic happens, or if we're upset about something, it's like this automatic, things can tighten so that we don't necessarily feel whatever that trauma is, whether it be a physical trauma or it be an emotional trauma. So there's that aspect that, it's like, I'm going to not let stuff in, and we might not know that, because again, we can't see what the state of it is inside the body, but we may be feeling signals as pain, different types of nerve pain around the pelvis. So that's an interesting thing about the pelvic floor, that it really will protect us. Is there anything else worth mentioning before we take a look and get some images up?
Well, let's see. Talked about protection. We talked about sexual appreciation. Showing the model. We could actually show the physical model.
Yeah.
That would be good. And people can touch on themselves so that they can find these bony landmarks on themselves.
Yeah.
So when you look at this, what sticks out the most? What draws your attention the most?
What draws my attention the most? Well, I'm seeing first the pubic bone and the sit bones as just the bony landmarks. And
Yeah.
then I also see up here, like, I know people that take, like in the yoga and Pilates world, they will often refer to the ASIS, these like as the front hip bones, even though they're not the hip bones, but
Oh, right.
I think we've all heard that language, front hip bones being the ASIS.
Yeah.
But in terms of the pelvic floor bony landmarks that really jump out at me, it's the pubic bone and the sit bones.
Right. So here we have the pubic bone and sit bones. Everybody knows what the sit bones are because it's the bones you sit on,
Yeah.
right? And the pelvis just kind of sits like that.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
And it's interesting that when we look at how the pelvis sits, that some people, you know, when we hold the pelvis, the ring is not underneath the ring of the pelvis, and the ring meaning like the circle inside the inner bowl. It's like a ring on its side.
Yeah.
That's not facing up. So
Yeah.
that's an important when we're looking at the model, how that's facing. It's that ring is really on its side.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sitting, we're hopefully sitting on our sit bones. And I know many people have said, well, I'm not sure that I necessarily can feel my sit bones. And so what's really good to do with that is to sit on a surface that's maybe a little bit harder, and then to rock back and forth. And by rocking back and forth, meaning to slump or posteriorly tilt the pelvis, and then to anteriorly tilt the pelvis. So if we think about the pelvis being a bucket that could hold water, that we could slump back and spill the bucket on ourselves, or we could roll forward and spill the bucket of water out in front of us. So as we begin to rock forward and back, that may give more of a sense of the sit bones.
Yeah. I love that example. Way to know that.
And knowing that there isn't just, I work with a lot of people who are perfectionists, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist myself. And there is not one right place to be on the sit bones. And some people, you might notice that your preferred place is a little bit rolled forward on the sit bones. That's certainly where my preferred pattern is. Or you might be a little rolled back. But there's no one right place. And I encourage you to just play and cycle between what does it feel like to go all the way forward, and what does it feel like to go all the way back, and then shorten that range and find what feels like a midpoint for today, where you are in this present moment. But know that that midpoint may be somewhere else tomorrow. And if you're not always in the midpoint, that's still okay. We are who we are.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, something that I think is another thing to look at for the pelvic bowl here is the muscles. But rather than trying to learn the names of the muscles, you don't need to learn the names. You just have to look at where the attachments are and the shapes and the patterns.
Absolutely. Oh, and we forgot one landmark. Sorry, guys. We did mention, I did forget to mention the tailbone. I'm sorry. But maybe you even felt that as you were tilting back, all the way back, that you felt pressure going on your tailbone, which is like the very tip.
Yeah.
And then when you came all the way forward, letting the bucket of water spill all the way forward, then your pressure is more on your pubic bone.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've outlined all of the.
Yes. And then since you talked about that, can you see this right here? This tip on mine?
Yes.
It's supposed to attach to the tailbone. So we have muscles. Can you see the muscles inside mine?
Yep.
All right, good. So we have the levator ani muscles, right? That's what they're called. But let's look at where they go. So we have some that go from the tailbone to the side. And Solange, you're going to show that on yours in a second because you did a beautiful patterning. And then we have some that go, two of them that go from the pubic bone. One goes to the rectum and wraps around it. and the other one goes from the pubic bone all the way to the tailbone. And then, of course, you have some others that go from the tailbone to this edge right here. So here's the sit bone, and there's a pointy edge. It goes from the tailbone to there. So, and then my favorite, I have a favorite muscle, is the muscle that is inside right here. Can you see that? And the Vader ani muscle. So the one that goes from the tailbone to the side here, it attaches to the fascia on this muscle. It's called the obturator internus. But what I love about it is, see, this is it right here coming through. Can you see? It goes to the hip bone out here. And so it has to do with moving your hip in and out, internally, externally rotating it. So, but I just love that because that's such an important muscle for the pelvic floor.
And I love that. And this obturator, this can be such a huge pain generator for people. And they don't realize that this deep muscle of the pelvic floor actually relates to the hip. So if they're doing all sorts of stuff at the pelvis to try to get at this muscle, but not addressing the range of motion, getting full range of motion, internal rotation, external rotation, moving the hip, that's a big thing that sometimes is missed with this obturator. What I think is so cool about the pelvic floor, and hopefully we haven't overwhelmed you so far with all these names. You actually don't need to know any names. Just know that there are 14 muscles. According to Google, I looked this up. This was in 2021. There were 14 muscles. Maybe they've added one or two since then, because now we're 2023. But what's beautiful about the Franklin method approach is that rather looking at the names, we're looking at just shapes and patterns. So you don't have to remember any name. We're just going to associate shapes and patterns for the different parts of the pelvic floor. So it really, really simplifies everything and makes it less intimidating for people. So the first shape that I want to show you, when we look at just the front part of the pelvic floor, which relates to our bladder. And if you look in between the sit bones and the pubic bone, so if you look at that shape, the front is more triangular in shape. And then if we look at the back part of the pelvic floor, and I'm going to turn it around this way, the part that relates more towards the rectum and the levator ani that Debbie so beautifully showed in her model, if you can see that this is more of a curved shape, and that curved shape following the curvature that we have in our glute muscles. So in the front, we have more of a triangle going from our sit bones to our pubic bone. And then in the back, we have more of a curved shape. And then what I've also shown in mine, if I show you the inside, is you can see, and I'll angle it this way because I think this is the best way to show it. So looking in, and I encourage you guys, if you're listening, to watch our video so that you can really see the beautiful models that we have and just see these visuals, because that's so important to connecting with the pelvic floor. So here we can see the levator ani, which really outlines the inside of the pelvis and how it connects to this yellow muscle here, which is our obturator internus. So it connects to the fascia of the obturator internus.
I love the way you designed that. That is so awesome.
And I encourage everyone, like especially if you're a teacher listening, take your model and try to make the shapes fit inside, because it's a fantastic learning experience. It will 100% give you such a great embodiment and an appreciation too, because as I'm working on my model, you can see that the tailbone is not, it's been kind of like moved off to one side, so it's not really symmetrical. So I'm like, whoa, I gotta, yeah, this is real life here, what I'm working with. So I gotta make these shapes that I'm putting in kind of fit with this pelvis that may not be in what one would consider ideal alignment. So it's a great exercise. So let's get into really trying to feel the pelvic floor in different shapes that can help us feel, the shapes and images that can help us feel the pelvic floor with breathing. So what images come to your mind, Deb, when you think of breathing in the pelvic floor?
I like the pelvic bowl. I mean, I just love breathing into the pelvis like it's a bowl, and just hip bones just floating apart and just creating more space. So, there's this the ring of the pelvic bowl, right? But then deeper down, there's more space. And so just breathing into that space, allowing the sit bones to just like go wide, spread apart. And then
so would you say, Deb, that your bowl is like the circumference of the bowl would be like the sit bones, but also the pubic bone and the tailbone? I'm trying to get my image of the bowl inside my...
So I think of the bowl more like here, right? And then you're breathing in, and as you're breathing in, you can see this, okay, here's the sit bones, that it's creating a pressure system into the sit bones so that the sit bones want to widen. Well, there's a joint here. So if the sit bones are going to widen, then this has to go the opposite direction, right? So it's kind of like it's changing that angle from being wide up here to being wide down here. So kind of a teeter-totter is what I think of, is just like that movement of, breathing in sit bones. So imagine these being my sit bones and this being the rim, the top rim. And so breathing in just widens.
And I love, what's so interesting, and this just came to me now, is so if we're in a pattern of holding our abdominals in,
right,
we're not going to get this teeter-totter. I was just thinking, some of us may not feel this teeter-totter happening. So let's just like rub our belly, try to like let it hang out.
Yeah,
it is all okay. Pulling our belly button in towards our spine is doing more harm than good for most people.
Yeah.
So allowing that, and then I love that teeter-totter, which allows the bottom to widen, but then you have this support that actually happens in the belly from the narrowing.
Right. And it's a great way to strengthen the abdominals.
Right. It's strengthening the abdominals without actually having to do something, because you got out of your way and let the sit bones just widen a little bit.
Yeah. Right.
That's what's brilliant about this Franklin Method approach, that really it was an image for the pelvis, but then that's a functional transverse abdominis exercise. So it's so great.
Right. I love that. Right. Because we don't even have to think about it, because a lot of people, they will tighten the abdominals, right? So their belly looks nice and flat. That's usually the reason for it. And they want to have a strong core. But doing this, I am so gripped and it is not comfortable, right? No. So I try to walk, right? It's very difficult to move gripping. But if I just let my belly relax, and then, as I breathe in, sit bones floating apart, the transverse abdominis is attached here. And so this iliac crest, the rim here, will come up. And that already is strengthening the abdominal muscles.
It's giving us that, I think many people use this language of there should be like a light level of core support. I hear this language being used a lot, a light level of abdominal support. It's giving us that without actually having to do it and to engage the muscle with whatever people would define as light, meaning less than 20% of effort, which is very low level for a lot of people.
Yeah.
One of my favorite images for the pelvis is to imagine the pelvic floor as a flower. Mm-hmm. So if you imagine when you take a breath in, the pelvic floor is a beautiful flower. I don't know, right now I'm thinking peonies. I love peonies. Tell me you're not, are you growing peonies? You could be.
No, look at this, a beautiful flower.
She's got the flower.
Another one's coming up.
So that I'm thinking of just this peony, which is round and somewhat bowl-shaped. So there being like this blossoming of this beautiful flower and this like the curved petals, and just the idea that the petals are soft.
Right.
And I think probably it's a good thing to talk about now. What are the ideal qualities of a pelvic floor? What qualities would we associate with the pelvic floor?
Right. I think of something supportive and responsive. That the pelvic floor responds to different types of activities, especially sneezing. Right, you sneeze, and that the pelvic floor is doing that "I gotcha" thing, or holding the baby in. Right, you want to have tone to be able to hold that baby in.
So having some tone, adaptable. So it's adaptable to the situation. So when you need a little bit more, it can give you a little bit more, but then it's okay to have a little bit less, and for it to be on all the time.
Yeah, and free to move. You go out and you're dancing, and your pelvis is moving, and just your pelvis is enjoying that movement, or hula dances.
There's nothing like seeing a great dancer moving their pelvis and moving their hips.
Right. When I was doing that imagery this morning with the sacrum on the ball, that's the movement I was doing was kind of like a hula dancer.
Oh,
right.
And that's great too. Like, what's great about Franklin method and using imagery is we could geek out forever on the anatomical imagery, but it's cool to use all different types of imagery. So using that motion as like the hula dancer, which is a different experience. And that's really, so many people have had that experience of a hula dancer. So that's something that really might resonate with more people. And we can just geek out about how cool is it that we're actually sliding these organs.
What about, I'm going to stand up to do this. What about a hula hoop? Too bad I didn't have mine here, but you're doing this, right?
Yeah.
Flexibility, and then can you go the other direction too? Right?
Yeah. So get your hula hoops, everyone.
Right. With us.
Absolutely. But I wanted, as we're talking about this mobility and the qualities of the pelvic floor, what I think is so interesting is this was back when I was in the preschool, and I met some moms who were postpartum, and they realized that I'm a pelvic floor physical therapist. And one mom said to me, "Well, you must have a really, really tight pelvic floor." And she was saying that in a good way, that like, oh, it's got to be tight. Like, we want our abdominals to be tight and look good. And, I could see where I think she was equating tight with strong. But in my mind, I was thinking tight is the last thing that I want in my pelvic floor. If my pelvic floor is tight, it is not moving. It is not allowing me to hula hoop. It is not allowing me that range of motion that I need when I cough or sneeze or laugh. So I just thought that was interesting, that a lot of people may think that a good quality for the pelvic floor is tight or a lot of tone, when what we want is to have a balance between strength and range of motion.
And I think about tight pelvic floor. We know this because we do pelvic floor therapy, right? So one thing that I'm always looking at is one side contracting before another side. And I have this way of doing it where it's on my YouTube also, how to do it. What I say to the person is imagine that your ilium, so these are the ilium here, are the ends of a book, and that your sacrum is a book binder. And in your mind only, I say, close the book. Well, while they're doing that, I've got my fingers on the transverse abdominis muscle, their abdominal muscle, because that co-contracts at the same time with the pelvic floor. And so then I palpate, so they're lying supine, and I palpate those muscles to see which one's firing first. So the one that's firing first, that's a strong one. So if they do Kegels or, some other method of strengthening and focusing on strengthening, they're strengthening the strong side because that's the one that's going to fire first. So that's the one that's always getting strong, where the other one is staying weak, but we want it to be symmetrical. So I kind of think of this tensegrity toy here, and let's say this is the tight side, right? How do you expect this to do the hula hoop on a side that's also too weak or doesn't have the right amount of strength to be able to do it, right? It's kind of like a sloppy, it's going to do it like this, one-sided.
Yeah, or it's going to stay stuck together. It's not going to be able to, like, if we're trying to do the hula hoop and it has to go around the curve and there's a section that's like bunched up or more taut, it's going to be a little more jerky, right? Or we're not going to get length in certain muscle fibers.
Right. So this side can move great, but this side doesn't move so well, right? It's a little bit rigid.
So this is a great exercise. So we all should practice this together. Maybe we just sit for a moment with our hands on our abdominals and just imagine that we're closing the book and see what we can feel. So in case we don't know where the ilium is, it's like if you feel just like bring your hands down, slide it down your waist, and that bone that you'll hit just at the top, that's your ilium. And then if you bring your hands forward in the front, what you'll feel in the front is your ASIS in the front. So if you put your hands a little bit above, and then let's just imagine. So are we closing both together? Like we're actually closing the book?
Close both together.
So just imagine there's an open book here, and then close the book.
So which side do you notice contracts first?
Well, I had this moment where this is really funny. I had this moment. I was like, neither were moving at first because like it was like performance anxiety.
Yeah.
But then I was like, all right, just do it. And then it was my right side. And I know on my right side, I have a little bit more tension in my obliques. So that totally made sense.
Right. And then for me, it was my left side. So the next part of that is if you know, then this makes total sense, right? If you know that for you, your right side is contracting first, then if you're going to close the book and you know the right goes first, well, why don't you close the book from the left side to the right side? So just be let's see, get that in the video there. Yeah.
I'm going to try it now. I'm closing. I'm closing my left side first.
Yeah.
I do also, this is not an easy exercise, and I'm glad we're talking about this because to get them both to close like right in the middle is really, really challenging. And then it's like, I felt like, okay, when I was imagining the left side, like that was closing, and then like the right side closed in a little. So like to really get it so that the left closes in just to the midline and then the right goes to the midline, that's not easy. So
that's not the goal, because the goal is to strengthen the weaker side. And so this is like ABCs. If you're going to learn to read, you need to learn your ABCs and what sounds they make. So this is doing it in your mind before you actually start any type of activity where you're trying to strengthen them. And so what I say to people is, so your weak side, once you know what your weak side is, then first close the book several times from the weak side to the other side, like all the way to the other side. So you do that a few times, a few days, do that. And then you start alternating. And then you go strong side, weak side, strong side, weak side, together. And then you'll find that, they go together so much more easily.
Well, that's why I was having so much difficulty with it. So, and look, see, even someone like myself who could be considered an expert, right? We all need help with these things. So we don't, I'm a work in progress myself. So thank you for sharing. Really, thank you for sharing this exercise.
Well, and I would think that, since I practice this, that they would close evenly. Well, mine weren't. The left side was stronger, overpowering the right.
There's always going to be something to work on.
That's right.
So let's get back to breathing. So we were looking at these beautiful images of the pelvis and the pelvic floor, but let's really get into what happens to the pelvic floor when we breathe in relation to the diaphragm. So in the last episode, which you should all watch, where we were talking about breathing and the diaphragm, and we did this shaking and bouncing, and we jumped rope with the diaphragm. It was awesome. So we are all on the same page. The diaphragm, when we breathe in, we know the diaphragm moves down. So if diaphragm is moving down, then what would our pelvic floor be doing? That's going to be our question when we breathe in. So diaphragm moves down, we have our abdominal contents, and we have our pelvic contents. So abdominal organs, pelvic organs. So if diaphragm is moving down, right, the organs, they're going to get pushed forward a little bit and down. They can't move back because our spine is in the back. So diaphragm moves down, organs get pushed forward and down. So what the pelvic floor actually does in response is it's going to lengthen and accommodate for that movement. So they move in sync with one another. And then when we exhale, diaphragm moves back up and pelvic floor comes back up with it. So with the inhalation, we have our two domes, our dome for the diaphragm on the angle of the ribs, and my bottom hand I have at the level of my pubic bone. And when we breathe in, those domes are going to move down. And then when we move out, they're going to move up. So they're moving in sync with one another. And this downward movement of the pelvic floor, it's not a letting go. It's a lengthening to absorb the force of the organs and support. So it's this controlled lengthening, and then it comes right back up as we breathe out. So let's try that a few times. Inhale, domes move down. Exhale, domes move up. One more time, and keep your hand modeling with the cycle of your own breath. Let's just stand for a moment, and we've been talking for about the pelvis, the functions, the qualities, some images, landmarks.
and now how it's moving with the diaphragm. And let's just check in and notice how our pelvis feels compared to our original check-in. My pelvis right now, actually, it's like my inner child. It's like, so it's like, I'm ready. What do you need me to do? That's the first thing that popped into my head. It's like, I'm responsive.
Yeah, it's responsive.
Walking,
Great word.
walking, it's time to walk. Okay, I'm ready to do that. We need to bend down and pick up stuff on the floor. Yeah, I can do that too.
I love that explanation of responsive. Yeah.
Oh, we need to reach for the cabinet and get something out there. Yeah, well, I can actually do that.
Yeah. Right.
How about you? What did you notice, Deborah?
I just noticed this like expansion deep inside.
Mm.
Just comfort, like warm and calm, relaxed. Nothing was forced. So no gripping, and just gently moving with my breath.
Mm.
And, and I think of, did you ever learn PNF in school?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I'm just going to demonstrate one of the moves, okay?
Yeah.
So, but this is because it's doing something at an angle, right? So you come down, I'm going down towards my ankle, and then rotating as I come back up. And can you see how the pelvic floor would just really like that movement? Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah. It feels so good.
Oh, this does feel good. So
Yes.
everyone, we should all just try this. So we're reaching down towards the feet on
Yeah.
one side, and then we're reaching up and across the
Right.
body on the other side.
Right.
And so as we're doing this, let's imagine a responsive and ready pelvic floor. And maybe let's try one rep where, let's try to do this if we have something that's tense or gripped or we're stressed out. Let's try that.
Right. I feel like I don't even want to go too far, right?
Like I'm moving through mud. I
Just
feel like
tighten your pelvic floor.
I feel like all of a sudden it's like I'm moving through mud or I'm lifting a really, really heavy weight. So I'm reaching down towards my left foot. Then I'm reaching up at a diagonal across the body. And I think what's really beautiful about the Franklin method exercises, as opposed to a lot of different exercise systems, is with this, there's really no wrong way to do it. It should feel comfortable for you, but just bend down and then rotate your body and stretch up. There really isn't a wrong way to do it.
Right.
I really liked that. And we're going to look at now how the front part of the pelvic floor and the back part of the pelvic floor, what happens there when we breathe. And we're going to use our fan. So the front is more triangular in shape. We have our urogenital diaphragm. And so if we know that when we breathe in, the pelvic floor is going to lengthen, then this triangular shape, which we're going to imagine as a fan, when we breathe in, this fan is going to widen. And then when we breathe out, it's going to narrow a little bit. So the widening is going to be that lengthening happening in response to the downward motion of the organs. And then as we exhale, it's that support where things are going to lift back up. And when I say lift back up, I'm not kegling or squeezing or doing anything. I'm just following the move. The inhale softens and lengthens the pelvic floor, and the exhale returns everything to the starting position.
What a beautiful fan you have.
You like my fan? I forget where I got this.
I love it.
Beautiful color. For those of you who can't see it, it's like, what is that, magenta? So we're going to hand model this. So I'm going to use my fan. And so I've had my fan spread out, and the sides of the fan are going to be my sit bones. And the handle of the fan is going to be my pubic bone. And if you don't have a fan, you could even just imagine that you're holding a fan and just have your hands just placed out in front of you with your fingertips pointing a little bit upwards towards your computer screen, your camera screen. And then we're going to take a breath in and imagine this triangle in between the pubic bone and sit bones widening. And then breathing out and narrowing. Widen and narrowing. And I just had this thought that came to me, because I know sometimes when we want things to lengthen, there's a tendency to want to make things happen. So some people may be tempted to try to push to make the muscles lengthen. So what I want you to imagine is just a softening, that the pelvic floor is just soft and it can just open in a little bit and let go. So maybe it's a soft cloth, or it's a soft clay that's pliable. So inhaling, imagining that fan opening. We're following an image. We're not trying to force or create something to happen. And fan narrows as we breathe out. Wow, that really gave me a sensation in the front part of my pelvic floor, almost like I'm a little bit kind of tingling around my bladder, I want to say.
Yeah, I kind of feel it. Let's see, I'm going to bring the camera down a little bit. Yeah, I feel it right here, which the bladder would be right about here. So just on the sides of the pubic bone, that's where it just feels kind of tingly and relaxed and letting go.
And I'm sure we've all felt this experience where we have a full bladder and like when we really have to go to the bathroom and it almost could be slightly painful, where it's like pushing up above the pubic bone. So I sort of have this kind of tingly sensation like behind the pubic bone. So it's a cool sensation to have. Very different than oh, I'm overloaded, I need to go to the bathroom. So we also have our back part of the pelvic floor, which we can imagine as a fan as well. So when we think of the back part of the pelvic floor, remember, we think of from our tailbone and above our sit bones, radiating forward towards our pubic bone. So this is our levator ani muscles, our deepest muscles of the pelvic floor. So really inside that pelvic bowl. So we can imagine that there is a fan from our tailbone radiating forward. And this fan is a little bit more curved shape because it's following, again, the curve of the glutes. So I'm going to try my best to hold this, and I may actually just release it down and just use the fan. So let's imagine that, maybe from the side I'll show you. When we breathe in, this curved fan is going to open. And then when we breathe out, it's going to close. So again, I'm holding my fan, and this time the handle of the fan is going to be the tailbone. And then the ends of the fan are going to be like inside behind my hip joints. And this part of the fan in the front is going to be the pubic bone. So it's kind of radiating out towards the pubic bone and then behind the hip joints. And breathing in that curved fan is going to open, and breathing out is going to close. Or widening and narrowing as we exhale. Inhale, widen. Exhale, narrow. And really hold on to that image, radiating forward towards the pubic bone from your tailbone. You can imagine that filling out inside that pelvic bowl, widening, giving space, and then narrowing. So we breathe out. I get a very different experience with this fan.
You tell.
Let's just notice for one. Let's give everyone a chance to notice before I plant anything in your mind. I definitely feel it as higher up in the body. So not, we looked at how the front part, the urogenital diaphragm, is here. And then the levator ani is higher up. So it is deeper in the body. So I have a sense that this is a little more up. But now it's like I've created this sense of support from my tailbone forward. So it really, where my sensation before was around the bladder, now my sensation is like this sense of support from back to front. That's how I describe that.
That's really awesome. Where I'm feeling it is these obturator internus muscles. So your yellow muscles here.
Yeah.
That's where I'm feeling it.
How cool is that? And
Yeah.
I think we should explain to people why that is, right? Because so we were putting an image where in my pelvis the red is, but if you can see that the red connects into the yellow, because we know the red inserts into the fascia of the obturator, that this exercise for you were really giving your obturator a stretch, right? If that's your aware, I mean, that's the beauty of the pelvis, that everything is fascially connected.
Right. And I didn't have to be focusing in on the obturator. I was focusing in on the fan at that level of the levator ani, just opening and closing.
That's so beautiful. In this episode, we're talking about breath, but certainly bringing it into movement. When we bend our knees and we squat or bend, those fans are going to widen and support us. And then when we stretch our legs, they're going to narrow.
Yeah.
So certainly, breath is just the beginning. We can put all of these movements of the fan, because we know what the bony landmarks are doing when we move.
Right.
So then what's happening is we're lengthening and shortening the muscles and getting a nice range of motion if we allow these fans to move and we don't grip and put tension that's unnecessary in other areas.
Yeah.
Let's check in and feel what that did for us.
Even my sacrum feels relaxed.
Oh, I have this sensation like within my pelvis, I sort of can feel, it almost feels like there's this ring of energy that's kind of moving around the inside of it. It's sort of like I'm feeling my postural sway in my pelvis, which is so cool. Like it's not only going in one circle one way. It's kind of like,
wow. That's nice. Yeah.
so cool to feel that, because I don't feel like I'm gripping it anywhere. So like everything seems available for movement possibilities.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. Do you have your orange balls?
I do.
Let's try this. So for all of you that have orange balls, or even the grip balls work too. The green balls, they can work.
If you don't have balls, then if you're wearing socks, take off your socks and roll up a sock, or definitely a washcloth.
That's a good idea.
Or you could even, like, I would even say, like, if you have a towel and you want to roll up a towel in one roll and put it lengthwise, you could do that. Because you just want something that you're going to rock back and forth on and move, just to give you some input into that area.
And just sit there without the balls. I want you to feel your pelvic floor. See how close it is to the place that you're sitting. Right? Do you feel like it's touching, or do you feel like a pancake? So then take the balls, put them under your sit bones. So if you can see, right there is where I'm going to put them. And I'm going to sit on them. Now you can have your hands on the seat like this. I'm going to put them here because the armrests are here. But actually, this is where I usually do it. So you're going to roll forward and back, real slow, 10 times. And notice that you're kind of doing a anterior, posterior pelvic tilt too, as you're doing it, to get that roll. And basically, I like to think of the sit bones just rolling on the ball, kind of like a rocking chair.
And we can actually apply any.
So that's about 10.
We can also, Debbie, in this exercise, we could even take any of the images that we use today and apply them in here. Like I'm still thinking of the fans. So as I roll back, I'm thinking fans closing. And then as I come forward, I'm still with the fans opening. So it could
Right. Oh, I love that.
It could be the flower.
That's great.
Your flower could be blooming, or you could think about just the pelvic bowl, sit bones widening as you come forward and sit bones narrowing as you go back. Okay, I did my 10.
Yeah. Then you're going to go side to side. So you're rolling horizontally, where the other one was more vertical.
Okay.
So you're just sliding where the ball is going to go on the inside of the sit bone, and then you roll to the other side, it goes on the inside of that sit bone.
This is just like a side movement. Yeah. I mean, it feels nice. When I first did it, I was like, oh, I am going to the side, but I'm pushing like the side that I'm going to, I'm pushing a little bit downward on that sit bone. And then when I go to the other, I'm pushing a little bit downward.
That creates a lift on each side, doesn't it?
Yeah. But then I can also do it where I'm just like sliding. So more like a pendulum going back and forth rather than like a side and down. I told you my pelvis is ready. So it can do whatever it's being asked to do.
Right. And then take the balls away.
Oh.
And just notice, oh my goodness, I feel like a pancake. What do you feel sitting there?
So much space. I feel like so much space. Like I didn't even know that there was this much space available to me. And I love that it's so important that we did that initial check-in, because if I didn't, I don't think this would have been, in fact, I know that it wouldn't have been as impactful. Like here, it's just, wow. And I think to experience this spaciousness, it's not a sensation that's natural, I would say. I think, listen, I'm in New York City.
Well,
we've all got an agenda here. Some places to go, people to see. Things are moving like that. My pelvis is on island time right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's the vagina and here's the rectum. So in between, that's a place where a lot of muscles attach. It's called the pale body. But while I'm sitting here, I feel like that point is on the hair, just so relaxed, resting, just kind of feeding into the vagina, feeding into the rectum for relaxation.
Nice. That area is in childbirth where women tear into, where you may have gotten an episiotomy, where women often get stitches. So to feel that tissue relaxed into the chair and not tight, and one of the assessments that we do as physical therapists is look at the mobility of that tissue to make sure that it is mobile in all directions and it's not pulled or adhered to one side, which it often can be from scarring. So this is a beautiful exercise to help treat the pelvic floor after birth to get mobility of that area. It's basically doing a scar massage without indirectly working on the scar. I'm also noticing my breathing, and my breathing feels expansive. That's the word that comes to my mind. Like as wide as my pelvic floor feels with the space in between my sit bones, I feel that width in my rib cage as I take a breath in as well. So it's matching that space.
And just emotionally, how do you feel? Like your mood?
Very calm. Very calm.
Mm-hmm.
I feel at home. I have this overwhelming feeling of gratitude for my body and gratitude for the Franklin method approach to working with the pelvic floor. So gratitude is really what's going through me.
I know I enjoy this every day.
The practice really just gets better and better. That's the one thing about it. We connect more to ourselves, and we really just continue to enjoy movement and to enjoy working with our body. So if you don't have anything else to add, Deborah, then we can close our practice for today.
So thank you so much for joining us and being here. And we're so excited to share all of this with you. And we don't know where we're going to go next week, but we'll come up with a good plan. And Solange, it was so much fun doing this with you too.
Absolutely. We always have a good time. So you'll have to come back and see what we have in store for you for next week. We promise it'll be a good one.
Always. Yeah.
Great to see you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we would greatly appreciate it if you would leave us a review. You can also become a patron of the podcast. Join our patron program to get access to movement practices from each episode, bonus episodes, and Q&As where we answer any questions you have about the practices. We look forward to practicing with you and continuing to share our passion. As we say in the Franklin method, better information leads to better navigation. Keep practicing, and we'll see you next time.